As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
All right, here's a quick pop quiz. What do Kim Kardashian, Justin Bieber, and Mr. Beast all have in common, other than 1 billion followers on social media? Yeah, they all use Shopify to run their businesses. An often overlooked secret of success is actually the businesses behind the business making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Kim uses for Skims. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic. It's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and must McLaren give its full backing to Lando Norris's World Championship bid, or is its apparent willingness under papaya rules to let them race the right way to go? I'm Ed Straw, and joining us to debate all things McLaren are Ben Anderson and special guest Will Buxton. Well, we're expecting a very lively discussion on this episode of the Race F1 podcast, not just because of the topic, but also because we're joined for the first time by F1 TV presenter Will Buxton, not just a familiar face and voice in the world of broadcasting, but also an author, given your second book is on the brink of release, Grand Prix, an illustrated history of Formula One. So here's your chance for a shameless plug.
Thank you so much, mate. Lovely to be on. Thank you so much for inviting me. And yes, the book is out in October in the UK. It came out in North America a couple of weeks ago, and somehow we hit the New York Times bestseller list, which was way beyond expectations. But yeah, it's sort of intended to be an easy path into the history of the sport. So if you've watched Drive to Survive for 5-6 seasons and want to know more about the history of the sport, that's kind of what it's aiming to do, because it's so mad to think that if fans have come in over the last 5 years, they never saw Seb in a competitive car, or they never saw Michael race. And there are so many facets of this sport which we can take for granted. Like we talk about Ayrton Senna, or when we were in Zandvoort a couple of weeks ago, we're talking about Max Verstappen could equal Jim Clark's win record. But there are going to be a lot of fans out there like, who the hell is Jim Clark? So that's kind of the hope for the book, is it just goes back through the whole history of the sport in a way that's not too scary, not too not too crazy scary anyway, and just introduces you to the key players, the key teams, and the key moments over 75 years of F1 history.
Yeah, and books like that are great, aren't they? I think everybody who's an F1 fan will remember kind of discovering the history of the sport as they read or watch or whatever medium they want to do. But I think anything that does that is great. And we will do a special book club podcast interview with you, talking in depth about the book that will be over the next month at some point. So I'm going to make sure I have a read of it first, so I can sit in judgment. That's the that's the important thing. And Ben Anderson, you're also here. How's life?
Hello. Yes, good, thanks. Yeah, I've been checking out Will's forthcoming book on Amazon, and I wonder if your vault up the New York Times bestseller list had anything to do with this Hollywood celebrity endorsement. Who needs Google when you have Will Buxton? That's the question I'm now asking myself. And I'm also asking myself, how much did you rely on Google? And therefore, actually, are you just a conduit for Google, or are you a replacement for it?
And that quote you just read is from Brad Pitt.
Yes, from Mr. Brad Pitt. I was Brad Pitt and Lindsey Vonn and Gordon Ramsay and lots of people wrote some lovely things about
Greg James,
Radio
1 DJ.
Yeah, it was lovely. I sent it out once we'd finished it to a couple of people that I've managed to meet through the sport over the last few years, because I thought it'd be fun to get a couple of different blurbs on the book,
of course,
from people sort of outside of our motorsport world that also love the sport, just to get their kind of take on it. So yeah, that was a bit mad. The Brad one was hilarious because we were well over deadline at that point. And I said to the guys at Penguin, I was like, I just need literally 36 hours more. And they're like, we have to go to print. Like, we have to go. And I'm like, it's for Brad Pitt. They're like, okay, we can hold for Brad Pitt. That's fine.
Good name drop.
Yeah.
So presumably, once I've read it and given my verdict, that can go there in the second edition, right? My verdict.
That's it, mate. Yeah, absolutely. And the way that the championship's going, we're going to need a second edition because I'm going to have to write up Lando Norris's page.
I think you're going to need more than a page for that. You'll have to bust the whole format for some of the opinions you've got as people will be here. And like I said, we're going to be talking about all things McLaren, the championship bid, how they're dealing with Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and all of that. And we're going to start with you, Will, because you're the perfect guest, because you've not for the first time become such something of a viral sensation this week with your opinions on how things are being done. So I've got a reasonable idea what you're going to say, but what do you say in response to the question of whether McLaren should be doing more to help Lando Norris's drivers' championship bid?
I just think they're ballsing it up, and I think they're going to throw it away. And listen, we're going to get into this. I've really been thinking about it since Sunday, and there are only four logical explanations I can think as to why they're not backing him, and almost every single one of them, the end result is that Lando ends up leaving McLaren, because. Well, we'll get into it, but I don't see how, with 8 races to go, and even before that, with 9 or 10 races. In fact, for me, and I've been asking this question of Zach Brown and of Andreas Stella ever since Lando hit P2 in the championship, which was the Austrian Grand Prix weekend, how you don't, even with just the slightest sniff of it, put everything you have into backing the driver who has the best chance of taking the Drivers' Championship, unless they really don't care and all they're concerned about is the constructors. It makes no sense to me what they're doing.
Wow.
Yeah, this is an interesting question because we've talked about this quite a bit. I've generally felt that Norris hasn't yet got himself into a strong enough position. He's still 62 points down. There's 10 points he could have been given in Hungary and Monza, which would put him 52 points down. So that's the interesting question for me. Definitely the principle of if you've got a shot at the Drivers' Championship, you always need to back it as far as you can as a team. But yeah, I wonder if they're just caught in that world where they're not quite yet into the position where Norris is really a Drivers' Championship contender. But then you can say, well, maybe he would be had they done X, Y, Z.
And this is it. So you look back to when we arrived in Austria, the points gap was 69 points, which is, we've only just got back to being at that level. It's 60 2 points now. As you say, it could be 52, 51 if they, reversed a couple of positions, Hungary, Italy. Had they not allowed Oscar to overtake Lando in Austria in the sprint, they'd have an extra point. And we were only talking about an extra point back then, but they all add up. And, when there were 10 races to go, there were 78 points, and Lando needed 8 points a weekend, and he's done that. But there was an opportunity in Italy for it to be more than the 8 points. And so you cut the gap back even more. There are, 232 points left for the remainder of the season now, if you take every victory, every fastest lap, and include the sprints in that. There are an awful lot of points on the board. To simply sit there and say, oh, you know what, 62 points is a lot, and it's impossible to overturn it. I don't believe that. Red Bull are on the back foot. McLaren have, since Miami had the fastest car in Formula One. The team just seems to have woken up to this fact later than almost everyone else in the paddock. When you've got Toto turning around saying they've now got a headache on their hands because they haven't played it right and they haven't got, the clear black and white rules in the team. They've got to figure this out now. Everyone in Formula One can see the writing has been on the wall for weeks, if not months. And it's just like McLaren are waking up too late to it. And they're going to wake up so late to it that they risk disrupting the harmony within the team, throwing away the championship. And if you don't back Lando, it could be seen as a tacit backing of Oscar. And this is the corner that they're backing themselves into now. And history tells us you cannot play it nice. You cannot have two number ones, because you either throw it away and you take points off each other, or you completely obliterate the harmony you're seeking to create. You can't have it. At a team that has the luxury of a competitive car, you can play it fine when you're battling over points and maybe a podium here or there. But when you have the fastest car in the sport, you cannot afford to have two number ones. We know, history tells us it doesn't work.
I guess the big question there is, whether Norris has done enough to be emphatic number one, because that's the tricky interaction, isn't it?
Yes.
What do you make of it, Ben?
Yeah, I think that is at the crux of it. So I would agree McLaren has the fastest car now, but I would say that's only emphatically been the case since the summer break, where they've gone to 2 rounds where you maybe wouldn't have expected them to be fastest. Zandvoort was one of their weakest tracks historically. Monza, we all expected Red Bull to be back in the picture, even with their present struggles. And that didn't happen. From Miami, they've been competitive, but they started the season on the back foot. So even if you started the season with even if we don't publicly say it, Norris is our best bet, we're going to back him throughout the season, it makes no difference at all up to Austria. Austria is the first time where they could have intervened in the sprint race. Oscar finished ahead after Norris messed up his battle with Max, so he could have handed him a point. I worked out, basically, you're talking 11 points. You're talking the Austria sprint, second versus third. You're talking Hungary, where they had a huge mess of undercutting Norris past, and then by their own logic, him having to cede it back in order to be fair to Oscar. And then you're talking about Monza doing a second and third swap at the end, if you're prioritising the Drivers' Championship.
Yeah.
But when you then weigh that against what Red Bull's done, I mean, up until Zandvoort, the only underperformance from Red Bull, and Max in particular, was Monaco, where if he'd not messed up Q3 himself, he would have started higher and got more points. So actually the performance profile of Red Bull McLaren, or rather Max Verstappen's Red Bull and McLaren, has been tight, with Max still overturning races where McLaren might have had a chance, like Spain, for example. So I wouldn't say since Miami they've had unquestionably the fastest car. They've had opportunities to do better in races, and they've squandered those. Norris has had his role in that. He's not, as he's admitted, not driven to the level of a world champion. And Piastri, who I would say is, given his experience, probably outperforming Lando this year overall. If you take a couple of races, Miami with the safety car helping Norris to victory, Piastri was in a better position to win that race until that happened. So you could very well say that if he'd got the result he deserved in Miami, and they hadn't screwed him with the double stack pit stop at Silverstone that they refused to do, where he was a victory contender and then went to the back of the leading group. Okay, so maybe they still mess up the final stint tyre choice and he doesn't beat Lewis. But even a second place there, a second in Miami or a win in Miami, you're then putting Norris and him at roughly equal points. So performance-wise, it's unquestionable for me that Norris hasn't emphatically been the better McLaren driver this year. Yes, he's got to the point from the early part of the season where, and some of these circumstances where he's got more points. But Max Verstappen's underperformance, or Red Bull's underperformance, has really been Hungary, Monaco, which was a known thing, and then, finished second in Zandvoort, Monza, where even in up to Q2 he was in pole fight. There was just some anomaly with the tyres. So although a lot of us are getting carried away with the Red Bull crisis, and yes, it's presenting an opportunity for McLaren in a Constructors' Championship, unquestionably they're favourites now. But Perez was already making that so, just because he's not been able to get to the level of the top of the grid. But Max is not going to finish sixth in every remaining race. What is the benefit of saying, right, well, we give Norris these extra points and we try to push him against Max, but then Piastri loses his mind because he's driving at a level better than a number two. You said, okay, they risk losing Norris if he's not getting the support he wants to leave McLaren. If they just back Norris at this point, they lose Piastri. He's not going to stay there. So they're this is always the rock and the hard place of having two quality drivers. I agree with you, but there have been periods where it works as long as you're clear. Ferrari, back in the distant past when they were capable of winning championships, Felipe Massa and Kimi Räikkönen were both at that time in the championship fight, 07 and 08, and Ferrari would always say, right, we get to a certain cut-off. It was Monza, I think, in those 2 seasons, and whoever's ahead, we back, regardless of the circumstances and whatnot. And one year it was Kimi, and he happened to be able to, steal it away from the McLaren drivers at the death. And the other year it was Felipe Massa, and he almost managed to steal it away from the McLaren driver at the death. That seems to me to be the fairest way to deal with 2 equal number one drivers, which is what McLaren have got.
Yeah.
Also, it's a rare situation. There are not many title races in the last 25 years where you've had this situation of 2 top drivers in the same team versus another external threat fighting for the championship. So it's only really just now that the championship fight's becoming a thing. The constructors know, but the drivers, it's been a pipe dream for the most part, and it still is, really.
So I would argue it's absolutely realistic to think about the Drivers' Championship, and they should have been thinking about it for far longer than they have been. The constructors, I think we can all see the point at which the tide turned, and with better decision making, more proactive strategic thinking during races, they might even be or had been leading by the time we went on the summer break. We look at Canada, horrible mismanagement of the strategy there. We look at Silverstone, you've already mentioned it, horrible mismanagement of the strategy, which could have handed the victory either to Lando or to Oscar, depending on how that one had fallen. Spain also wasn't brilliantly handled, but particularly Canada and Silverstone, and had those worked out differently. And, it's ifs and buts and all of those kind of things.
Yeah.
They could have been leading the constructors by the time we went on the summer break. Might they then have thought, okay, we've got this, we can start to think about the drivers?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. They might well have changed if they'd been cleaner, but that's on McLaren,
possibly,
isn't it?
But again, it's on. So when I came down to my four question marks over McLaren and this entire drivers' championship debate falls down into 4 very simple categories. Number 1, do they even care? Is it just the constructors that they care about, and the drivers, they're not bothered? Just, you guys have some fun, fight it out between you, so long as we don't take points off each other, we don't make contact with each other, you don't take points off the team, all good. We're going to win the constructors. Happy days. That's what pays the money at the end of the season. That's all we care about. Number 1. Number 2, total ineptitude. They don't know what they're doing. They can't manage their drivers. The strategy is all over the place. They aren't ready for a championship fight, and they're going to throw it away through purely through mismanagement. Harsh, but again, I'm trying to run through why is this happening and what possible reasoning could there be for it. The third is contractual. That somewhere, be it in Oscar or Lando's or both contracts, there is a clause somewhere that says they both have to have number 1 status, or that the team cannot take any decision which negatively impacts that driver. So you cannot force a driver to cede position. You cannot force them to give up a position in the race. You cannot take a strategic decision that benefits one over the other. So McLaren are essentially racing with one hand tied behind their back. Might that give reason to some of the length of time it has taken them to make seemingly simple decisions in the race? Might this be why they are constantly asking their drivers to determine what tyres they want to be on, what strategy they want to be on, if the team themselves making that decision might be seen as potentially favouring one driver over another? Again, putting it out there, no idea. We will never, and you can go to Zach and you go to the team and say, so Zach, is there a clause in the contract that says they both have to have number one status?
Oh, yes, Will. Yeah, I'll tell you about that right now.
Exactly. We don't discuss driver contracts. So, we're not going to know for another 10, 15 years until they've retired, whether that is. And the fourth option is personal. And it is, and I've heard whispers of it and chat within the paddock and within the team, some members saying that actually there is a belief starting to form at McLaren that Oscar's ceiling is higher than Lando's. Lando's been there for 6 years, Oscar's been there for 18 months. And Ben, as you say quite rightly, Oscar, particularly over the last 6-7 races, and probably on balance this year, Oscar has been the more impressive driver of the two. I don't think you can take that away from him, given his experience. Okay, we sometimes forget the age gap between the two of them is not very much. It's just that Lando arrived in Formula One so young.
Yeah.
Mostly because Red Bull came knocking and wanted him, and McLaren had to rush him in. Otherwise, they risked losing him to Red Bull. And Red Bull have carried on knocking at the door, and Lando has continually said, no, McLaren is where I'm happiest. McLaren is where I want to be. Zach, Lando's his golden child and has been for over half a decade. But there is a feeling starting to form at that team that potentially Oscar is the better of the two.
Well, I think that's, as you say, it's been true the last few races. Probably on the overall part of the season, it's been close. He was definitely second best in the early part when the car was less good.
Yes.
As the McLaren's become a better machine and a winning machine, Piastri's grown with that. I think that's another element that's important because that's what Norris should be doing. It's what Lewis always did when he and Bottas. I mean, Bottas was number 2, but he wasn't contractually number 2. It wasn't a Michael Schumacher, Eddie Irvine situation. But as Ed wrote many times, Bottas had that almost ideal number 2 driver mindset where he didn't believe it, and he started every season strongly, pretty much. It was like often the case that he would win a few races, be kind of neck and neck with Lewis, and then as Mercedes developed the car, Lewis would go with it and Bottas would get left behind. And in McLaren's situation, you would expect something similar because of Norris's experience and the level we think he's at. It happens with Ferrari. As soon as the Ferrari gets better, the Clerk kind of goes with it. Sainz is probably better with the weaker car. And of course, it yo-yos more between them because the Ferrari tends to go up and down rather than just having this linear development that takes it on. So given McLaren's situation and given how well Piastri's gone with the car, it would almost be embarrassing for Norris to be handed the Drivers' Championship with Piastri's help. I mean, because he's been ahead of him in these recent races. Like, what's he supposed to do in Monza? Be like, oh, there you go, Lando, you need some help again. I mean, Lando's even said himself he doesn't want to beg for someone to hand him positions. He wants to earn the championship on his own merits. And I agree with his own analysis. As good as I think Lando is and has been recently. I mean, last year he was incredible. This year he hasn't been good enough to deserve the championship, even if McLaren had prioritised him from the start. And so therefore, I do think there is an element of them disregarding it. I think they started the season going, we know we're not going to have the bits on the car we need to hit the ground running, so we've got to sacrifice the early part of the season. Norris really made that bit pay, but obviously that's where Max was just cleaning up race after race. Then the car gets good, but of course from that point, you're starting almost from zero, and it's like, well, we're in the fight. They execute a few races quite well, some less so. I mean, in Spain, I don't really know what else they were supposed to do, except that, Norris made the third best start of the 3 best starts on the grid that race. It's so hard to overturn. The Red Bull was quick enough. Canada's a quite marginal one. They admitted they could have made that safety car, if the safety car comes out, pit call. There's an element of them, you've mentioned this, Ed, them not being battle sharp. So they've definitely squandered some points, but I still don't feel like it makes the significant difference in terms of
but now
Max versus Norris.
We come back from the summer break. There's 10 races to the end of the season. You have to reset your objectives. You have to reset your mindset for those final 10 races. Look at it and think, we are in the hunt for the constructors, and we could, if we played this right, be in a position to fight for the Drivers' Championship as well. And why would you not do that if you had the opportunity to do so?
I think you'd only say it after now, though. It's only Monza, since that reset point, where Max has had a bad race. Zandvoort, he was right there. Okay, they were experimenting with the car.
But they have been there in the hunt for victory at almost every race since Miami. They've been up there. They've been punching in a way that they haven't been. Okay, listen, we rewind 18 months. They were back of the grid. So the ascent has been rapid. But you take your chances when they come in this game. You only need to look back mid-2000s, BMW, having a great year. Robert wins in Canada. They're leading the championship. Oh, we can fight for this. And BMW go, no. We'll wait till next year. And we'll fight for it next year. Next year's car was a dog. They pulled out of the sport at the end of the year. You never know when your chances are going to come. You have to take them when they arise. And this is what McLaren have right now. Yes, it's an outside chance. Lando has done what he needed to do over the last 3 Grand Prix to cut it down from 78 to 70, 70 to 62. He carries on doing that every single weekend. It's his championship by the end of the year. 8 points. It's all he needs every weekend.
But he wasn't good enough in the race at Monza, was he? I feel like McLaren are taking their chance because they are winning. They are going to win the Constructors' Championship.
But I also think that Lando raced in Monza. He was racing angry and he was racing disappointed because the one person he didn't expect the threat to come from was his teammate.
Oh, he must have known. Look at the way Piastri put the moves on him in Hungary. Just brake later into the chicane.
Why? The move shouldn't be coming from his teammate. Because if McLaren are thinking smart, you maintain your position, you hold your position, and Lando is your number one because he's got the best mathematical chance of winning the championship. So once you've got 1-2 going through the first couple of corners, right, Oscar, the one thing you don't do now is put the move on your teammate, because you put the move on the teammate, admittedly, with a beautiful move. And it was sensational. It was ballsy. It was gutsy. It was wonderful. I loved it. But what it also did was it took Lando by surprise, and he lost not one position, but 2 positions. Therefore, then making the strategic decisions the team had to make later in the race more complicated. Okay, they were always going to do the 2 because they were stuffed with their tyre wear. But you put your team then on the back foot. And that should whatever these papaya rules are, the fact that they had to go away afterwards and determine whether Oscar's move adhered to the papaya rules or not. As I've said, they're not papaya, they're grey. It's black or white. It's one thing or another. You can't exist in the grey areas, and you can't exist where you're forcing your drivers to make the decisions in the race as to what is and isn't acceptable. You're going into the final 10 races of the season. One driver has a mathematical chance of this championship. Oscar is performing better, yes, but he's not at the same mathematical point that Lando is. Lando has a shot. So you back him. You back the guy that you've been backing for 6 years and telling him, you're our guy, you're our future world champion. Oscar's time will come. The next year, the year after, possibly. And I say you have to take your chance when it comes. But I do not understand how you allow your drivers to race each other when you have a championship that could be so tightly contested that it could come down to single points at the end of the season. Because you just, and then at the end of it, to celebrate, okay, and this is a thing about mindset, to celebrate a 2-3 with a celebratory photograph where you've thrown away a 1-2 on the grid, I don't get that. And you wouldn't see a Mercedes celebrating a 2-3 with a big celebratory photograph when they threw away a win. They've got, and it's all about getting your head back in that championship mentality. And I don't think McLaren have it at the moment.
Yeah, I do think that's an important thing. It's that learning how to be a championship contender, that McLaren's on a learning curve and perhaps not moving along that learning curve as quickly as it can be. We'll have a quick break, and then there's some more details of Monza I think are worth talking about that inform this debate.
This episode of the Race F1 podcast is sponsored by ZBiotics. ZBiotics is an absolute game changer because if, like me, you're in your mid-40s, having a night out with a few drinks can leave you feeling considerably worse the next day, and you can't bounce back the way you did when you were in your 20s. But with ZBiotics, you don't have to make that choice between having a great night or a great next day. There's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. It's with pre-alcohol. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And in the words of Jennifer Aniston, here's the science bit. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So, just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Try it for yourself, and you will believe the hype. Go to zbiotics.com/race to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use RACE at the checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. That's the letter Z, or Z, if like me you're in the UK, biotics.com/race and the code RACE at checkout for 15% off. One last time, zbiotics.com/race.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Poker ASMR. Almost as much as I love playing poker, I love the sounds of poker. The chips, the cards, the hands, and of course the WSOP app sounds. If you love poker, play poker.
Download the WSOP free-to-play app and hear for yourself.
Right. Well, before I get into the specific thing at Monza, I just want to quickly run through those 4 questions, Will, because I've got very quick answers where I think they are. Do they care? Yes, because the Constructors' Championship pays money and it's the team championship, but the world champion is not the team, is it? It's the driver. Nobody calls Mercedes 2021 world champions, do they? They call Max Verstappen. So I think they do care. Are they, on the second question, are they just messing it up? Are they inept? I do think they are trying to kind of let it play out in an uncontrolled way and hoping it'll kind of resolve itself, which could be a mistake. Third point, contractual. I think every driver will have some kind of thing in there saying they've got to obey the team's instructions at times. And they're idiots if they box themselves into a corner contractually, but it's possible, you never know. And yeah, we talked about the point about Oscar's ceiling. I have a suspicion that actually with his driving style, the sort of he's a bit more of a V driver than a U driver, if you want to look at it that way. I do think that's fundamentally a style that can be quicker, although Norris is a very accomplished driver. Now, the Monza example that interests me, you talk very correctly about the impact of that Piastri move on the first lap at the second chicane. Now, from what they said, it sounds like that was fair game because they said, we need to check it with papaya rules. But I presume they're just, you can race, but don't drive into your teammate or something.
Well, Norris clarified that, didn't he? He said it's just don't crash immediately after the race. So, and they didn't crash.
And Zach said the same.
Exactly.
Zach said the same.
So I can't at all blame Piastri for taking that opportunity, making a statement in the process. That's always the tension in F1, isn't it? Is there's a team and there's 2 separate drivers. But the bit that really interested me in that race was that second stint, because clearly they were letting them race as well. So Piastri wanted to stay away, Norris wanted to close up. They disregarded the possibility of a Ferrari one-stopper. And Stella has admitted that maybe if that second stint, if they called off the battle and said, right, before you two can do anything, we've got to make sure we win this race. So we need the front left managed, and that is the weak point of the tyre management for McLaren. Stella didn't say definitively that if they'd gone all-out management on that stint, they'd have made the one-stopper work, but he did say they might have done. So that's the interesting thing for me, because I'm always wary about stage managing first laps, but things like that scenario, that's a point where I feel that the team's cause breaks down. And they almost put letting the drivers have their own battle ahead of the team, which I think is definitely backwards.
But Norris couldn't do it, could he? He had this understeer in the first stint that they were trying to correct with the wing angle. They never really never really got on top of. So
and interestingly, they'd put the old front wing back on for P3 in quali and the race. They took off the Monza spec front wing because they, as you say, they needed to try to resolve the understeer issue that they'd experienced all the way through. They knew they were going to have time management issues in the race. So
it's not like Singapore when Ferrari were kind of stage managing that first stint last year. A track where there's no real chance of anyone getting past you. And they were doing such a slow pace at the start that like Logan Sargent in like 20th was lapping at the same pace as the leaders. That's not really possible at Monza. Like if you reimagine the race where they kind of go, oh yeah, front left, they're just going to get swallowed up by the Ferraris, bring the Mercs into play, Verstappen too. And there's probably an element in the race where they disregarded, I wouldn't say Ferrari because it was the clerk making the difference, wasn't it? Sainz didn't pull off the one stopper.
I think they did dismiss the idea of
they dismissed
Leclerc one stopping.
Yeah,
they thought it would be failed.
Yeah, and Leclerc managed to pull off one of his just masterful drives, which is probably why they were happy to celebrate second and third, because ultimately there was just a bit of a magic performance by Leclerc in a Ferrari that won Ferrari the race. I do wonder if they could have split the two McLarens to cover it. But I don't know. I haven't studied the race enough to know how that would have, what they would have sacrificed and which driver they would have done that with.
Well, exactly.
Well, the big question there is, did they let their weaker driver in Norris, who was struggling, dictate the strategy of their lead driver because they didn't want to risk Piastri extending, trying to one stop, making a second stop later on, and dropping behind Norris?
Maybe.
I feel that they wanted to match the strategies.
But then you're back into that question mark of, well, who's leading who? And who's making the decisions, and why are they so stifled in the decision making process? Why can't? Would they ever split the strategy now at this part of the season, or are they so focused on parity between the drivers that it's actually tying their hands? It's actually binding them.
Parity between drivers should be the number 2 objective to the team results. If you can win a race, you need to win it. And that's the one thing we can say 100% McLaren haven't done as well as they should have done this year. There have been lots of races where they didn't necessarily, they didn't actually have a huge advantage in the race or anything at Monza because of the tyre situation, but they could have won Monza, just like they could have won Imola, they could have won Spain, they could have won Canada, they should have won Silverstone. So that strike rate is what concerns me for them. That's the thing that's definitely not working.
But they wouldn't have won all of those races with Norris. This is where I think the Drivers' Championship becomes a bit of a disregard thing, because it's different McLaren drivers at different points who've been more or less screwed over by McLaren being inept. I really agree with the second point that they've been inept. There are good reasons for that. The fact they've just not been in the fight for so long, they're just not quite as sharp.
Do you believe that? Because surely strategic decision making, it doesn't matter if you're fighting for wins, podiums, points. In fact, when you're at the back, the quality of your strategic decision making is even more important, because you're fighting over
It's less pressure. It's less pressure, isn't it? It's like you can hide a bit more if you get something wrong. There are a few more random factors that are harder to take account of. Sometimes it simplifies it, whereas at the front you can overthink it. And on the point about the drivers being, the parity between the drivers being paramount, in some ways, to me, it's the opposite. Like McLaren have been more obsessed with putting the team first. That whole self-inflicted hungry debacle where they were like relentlessly having to pressure Norris over the radio to give back the lead, and he was almost toying with the team over it. The whole messaging after that was, the consequences if he hadn't have acceded to that demand would have been, he wouldn't have been part of this team anymore effectively. Like Stella was being quite clear, and has been throughout, that like, regardless of, horribly phrased papaya rules, the team comes first. But then the way they execute the races, it's almost like they've tied themselves in knots over that. Like Ferrari's way of doing this, with Leclerc sacrificing Singapore last year so Sainz could win, there was very much a clear intention that it's about Ferrari winning a race. But of course, at the same time, it's a situation where you haven't got unquestionably the best car. So how that aim of the team to say, right, they always want to prioritise the team, everyone does. But it's much easier to do when you kind of know you're into a bit of a lost cause. And of course, now McLaren aren't into that. And it's happened almost by stealth, the way this season's gone. They haven't been able to lay it out from the beginning because they just weren't in the fight. As they've become more in the fight, they're having this tension between what they're setting out to do, putting McLaren first and winning the Constructors' Championship, with two drivers who, in Norris, he thinks, well, actually, I might have a sniff of a Drivers' Championship I never thought I would have a sniff of, and it's time for me to crack on and do that. And Piastri's saying, well, hang on, I'm the coming guy. I need to, if I've got the chance to stake my claim, I need to do it, because he could, regardless of contracts and what have you, make McLaren his own just by the virtue of his better performance. So if he has a chance to stick a move on his teammate cleanly and win the race, maybe he's going to do it. I mean, in terms of stage managing the first lap at Monza, I remember 2018 Raikkonen having the surprise pole, locking up into the first chicane, holding Vettel off to keep the lead, and of course Vettel then stays in dutifully behind him and thinks, so I'm not going to attack Kimi into the second chicane. Lewis comes around the outside and they have a collision and Vettel's race is over. So there's another scenario whereby Piastri doesn't attack Norris but then gets attacked by Leclerc, and then McLaren loses one of the dogs in the fight. So Monza specifically, I think, is always quite difficult because, compared to other races, it's just not so easy to stage manage that type of race, especially on the first lap.
I think you're right, and there is an element in this as well of, if you hold Oscar back and you ask Oscar to back up Lando, do you in some way negatively impact his rapid ascent and the confidence that he has in the team to make the decisions for him, and the ever increasing confidence and craft that he's able to show?
Yeah.
But we do fall back to Hungary, the guilt trips that the team laid on Lando the whole way through. You're going to need Oscar if you want this championship. All of that kind of stuff, Okay, well, where's Oscar now? Because Lando does have a sniff at the championship. And one thing he wasn't expecting was for his teammate to jump him on the first lap in Monza. Or when you're in a 2-3. Look, you're not giving up a win, are you? McLaren can easily switch those positions, get a couple more points for the championship. Does it matter at the end of the day? It's not a victory. It's a P2. It does, is Oscar going to remember he had a okay P2 at Monza one year or a P3? Long run, it doesn't matter. But it could be a couple more championships for Lando in the Drivers' Championship, even if it's pie in the sky, even if it doesn't come off. Why not make that effort? Why not put your eggs in that basket? And let's be honest, Andrea knows how to execute that because he's done it with Michael. He's done it with Fernando. This isn't a strange new world for Andrea. He's very, very used to it. And he knows exactly how to run that kind of an operation. So the fact these papaya rules exist, or whatever the hell they are, they're not as clearly defined as Andrea knows they need to be. And so that's part of it that just doesn't make sense to me and baffles me.
But it does seem to have been made more difficult for McLaren by the fact there is a little bit more back and forth between the two drivers. As you said at the start, Will, historically we've seen the number one, number two thing works really well, but it's much easier to execute that if you're Ferrari and you've got Rubens Barrichello as Michael Schumacher's number two, who'll have a couple of weekends where he's mega and maybe above Schumacher's level, but there won't be that strike rate. And that's almost the tension, because I feel like McLaren's got a willingness to back Norris. And again, this is guessing about what's been talked about behind closed doors, because Piastri always says when he's asked, if they ask me to, I'll back him. I'm happy to do that. I'll follow instructions. But I wonder whether...
But did you hear post-race? He gave a no comment. Would you back Lando? And he was like, no comment.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you don't give race drivers leeway, do you? It's a bit like in Hungary when they gave that instruction to Norris to give the place back at his convenience, which just creates a little grey area. And like you say, grey areas are the problem. And if you're Oscar Piastri, actually Norris and Piastri get on well. I don't think there's all-out war in the team, but they both know there is a long-term battle for who's the lead driver in this team. And it could still go either way, but certainly
that's the key thing. Piastri
might
too
have
good.
more potential.
Yeah, Piastri's too good for this role. That's the problem they've got fundamentally, and not even sort of number 1.5. He's not like even a Daniel Ricciardo against Verstappen, where it's kind of weighted in his favour for a bit and then it's kind of creeping up. Like, he's right there. Last season he wasn't because of the time management thing, but he's made massive strides, and now there's not really much to choose between them. Like, if McLaren's life would be much easier if Norris could just settle it for them by being as good relative to Piastri as he was in the first part of the season before the Miami update. But since then, it just yo-yos depending on who's feeling it on a given weekend and who makes the best of the start. And Piastri recently has probably shown better form overall, certainly in the races, certainly in the first laps. And Norris is making it difficult, really difficult for McLaren to say unquestionably, we have to throw our weight behind you, because he's just not driving well enough, consistently enough.
I do agree with that. I really do. And, you always get accused of bias towards the drivers from your own nationality, when you're doing the
Yeah.
Which is funny because earlier in the season, I had the Lando Norris fans absolutely tearing me apart because I dared to suggest that he jumped the start in Saudi. It's very fickle online. But
it is, yeah.
It is. But I do completely agree with you. Lando hasn't put his stamp on it. He hasn't gone out there and put in the kind of dominant, consistent performances that a world champion needs to do. And he says he doesn't want it handed to him. He doesn't want to sort of sleepwalk into it. But I do also feel this is kind of a situation McLaren have made for themselves by not backing him. Lando is a very mindful character. He puts so much on himself. He overthinks everything, both what he does and what other people do. And I'm sure that every time they don't back him, it's working around in the back of his head. Why are they not backing me? What is the situation here? And if, let's say, he misses out on the Drivers' Championship by single points, or heaven forbid that, not heaven forbid, or Oscar has an amazing end to the season and finishes ahead of Lando in the Drivers' Championship points, I think that's the beginning of the end of Lando at McLaren.
Yeah, maybe, but then it's probably deserved, isn't it? Because if he can't raise his game enough to see off his teammate and finish ahead in the championship, regardless of whether that's ahead of Max Verstappen or not, then he doesn't deserve to be the guy that McLaren backs the long term, in which case they've made the right decision because they've got a better driver with a higher ceiling who they can get behind in the future. I think it's difficult to separate the two things out and say, okay, if Piastri was a slightly lesser driver or McLaren had made a different decision to get behind Norris, everything would be gravy, because one of the main reasons they have such a good chance to win the Constructors' Championship unexpectedly is because of how good Piastri is. Like, he's right there in behind or ahead of his teammate, making sure that, regardless of whether you say one finishes ahead in Hungary or the other finishes ahead in Monza, that's maximising in the McLaren's points chances on the day from the driver's point of view. Whether the team's executed the race right in terms of strategy is a different question, but McLaren is unquestionably better for having those two level drivers, probably the highest caliber teammate pairing in terms of current performance on the grid. Whereas Red Bull, the only reason they're throwing away this Constructors' Championship, regardless of their aero problems since, happenstance would have it, Newey stepped back from being involved day to day in the team, is because Sergio Perez for far too long has been allowed to squander that car and underperform to the level he has. So there's a bigger question for McLaren in terms of what the priority is, and it has to be the Constructors' Championship, because that's what those two caliber drivers can deliver you when you start your season on the back foot and then unexpectedly get a leg up from your amazing development.
It's a bit Ronnie and Mario, isn't it? It's a bit 1978.
Yeah.
Lotus did do the priority. Mario was the number one. Ronnie had to play second fiddle, despite the fact that invariably Ronnie was way quicker and proved it weekend in, weekend out. But Mario won the title. It's about your priorities and what you want, and ultimately having control over your team. And the one thing that I just find this year with McLaren, the frustrating part of it is that they're either not in control or they're ceding control, or there's something in there where...
Well, they have a history of not doing it too, don't they? Like Alonso Hamilton, much to Alonso's annoyance that Hamilton wasn't forced to...
This isn't the team of the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s.
But history weighs heavy, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does.
Even Mika Häkkinen's been moaning recently that he could have won the 2000 World Championship if they just reined David Coulthard in. But they did... In that period, they didn't.
Yeah.
It was very much the kind of similar to the Williams thing and what Red Bull subsequently did. It's like, well, we'll just let them sort it out themselves. And that is there's always a negative consequence to whichever policy you adopt. You go down this traditional McLaren route, or in the recent past Red Bull route, and going equal number ones, whatever it says in the contract, and then letting them fight it out. Then you have multi-21s and Webber getting really annoyed because after his first title shot kind of goes wrong, he just kind of dips. Equally, you can go the Merc Bottas route and go, we'll give you a chance, but probably what's going to happen is you're going to have to fall in behind Lewis, and eventually it crushes the other driver and they just don't deliver what they're capable of. And that's the thing McLaren are balancing with Piastri. They can say to him, just get behind Lando because you're the young one. But if he's performing at a level where he can beat Norris quite regularly on a given weekend, he's going to just get frustrated with being asked to help, in his mind, a lesser driver out. And that isn't sustainable. And of course, he is the younger driver, the one they have less data on at McLaren. So if they need to hedge their bets in terms of the long term, you can't afford to pigeonhole your potentially better driver in that way. You just can't.
And that, be it next year, be it the year after, Red Bull will very likely be in need of another driver. And so is it going to be Piastri or Norris that they come knocking for? Because they've wanted both.
Yeah.
And they've wanted Norris for a long time, but Piastri, we know, is on their radar.
Hence the contract extensions. Piastri did his Japan last year. Norris did his before the season. And they're going to be arguing for more. I agree with you, even though we'll never know.
And you're going to lose one of them.
You will eventually.
One of them's going to walk, and I guess it's whoever. But there is, if you don't back Norris, then you're tacitly backing Piastri.
But to McLaren's point, if they're going to lose one, and it's almost like immaterial which one because they're similar enough level, and it's just the way the cookie crumbles. Again, the team should just prioritise the team. Yeah, we can win the Constructors' Championship because they're both that good. The Drivers' Championship is nice to win, but it doesn't matter to us because if we back Norris and he wins it, but then he ends up leaving down the road anyway, you're not building some kind of long-term legacy with him like Merc were doing with Hamilton or what like Ferrari did with Schumacher. It's a whole different question. The fact they've got those two drivers means they don't know which one yet is the one to back, and maybe they just don't want to back one of them because it's not in their interest to do that.
But then they risk everything. And this is it. By not choosing, you're making a choice. They risk
the drivers, not the Constructors' Championship.
But you also risk the team harmony you are trying to create, and ultimately you're forcing one of them out the door.
That's their decision, though, isn't it? They're laying it out, saying, right, the team comes first, Lando. So you want to win the Drivers' Championship, up your game and be at Zandvoort level every weekend, and then the question will sort itself out. But if you're going to underperform and make mistakes, we're not going to bail you out just because you've been here a bit longer. And I think Norris is pretty straightforward and honest with himself. I think he gets it. I'm also because he knows it's a long shot. It's not quite like Kubica and BMW, where you had 4 drivers in the top 2 teams just taking points off each other, and there was a big shot. Like it's more that it's just come by accident. You've maybe got a chance of winning this championship if Max is at Monza level for the rest of the season. But that is really unlikely. And it's really only Monza where you could say, okay, if they could have thought about the drivers and swapped them if they do predict that. But I just see the Red Bull underperformances in Max's case are such an anomaly across the spread of the season, unless they just somehow make the car worse again.
Which is why you've got to take your chances when they arise. They shouldn't have switched positions.
But Lando does too, doesn't he?
They shouldn't have switched positions in Hungary. They should have switched them in Monza. You take your chances when they come, every single time. And if they end up winning the Drivers' Championship, brilliant. But I can see a scenario where McLaren lose out by single points and will get to the end of the season, look back over the races and feel absolutely stupid that they didn't take the choice that was easy to take for fear of upsetting someone.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? We'll get to the end of the season and there will be, if Verstappen beats Norris to the championship, there'll be a certain number of points that it's by, and then you've kind of got a definitive test to hold them to.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Time now to tell you about the sponsor of this episode, Grammarly. Do you struggle with when to use fewer instead of less? Do you find yourself writing important emails which, when you look back on them, take far too long to get to the point? Are you guilty of exclamation marks and too much jargon? Well, Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you find the words you need and the right text for your context. It learns your personal style and your brand or company style to give you personalised suggestions based on what you're writing and who's going to read it. Grammarly works across all the apps and sites you use like Word, Google Docs, Pages, Slack and more, so there's no need to copy and paste. Grammarly works where you work. Smart features like tone suggestions help you navigate even the most difficult work conversations. And what's more, data privacy and security are woven into the foundations of Grammarly. It's the gold standard of responsible AI with 15 years of best-in-class communication, trusted by tens of millions of professionals and IT departments. So get AI writing support that works where you work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Grammarly. Easier said, done.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Right, the big question is, we've been over what's happened so far. But Will, you're in charge of McLaren. You're having your meetings before the next race. 8 races to go and 3 sprints. What's that? 232 points, something like that. What is the Will Buxton version of papaya rules that eliminates the grey, that wins them both championships, and that doesn't cause any problems?
Do you know what? I had really clear papaya rules coming into this, but Ben has done a very good job of arguing the counter. Listen, I think we can agree Oscar is the stronger driver right now, and Oscar probably is the driver that McLaren will back going into the future. Heaven knows Zach likes to change his golden boy, as we've seen in IndyCar fairly frequently. But I think
sometimes contracts
Oscar,
enforce that.
Sometimes not. I would say to Oscar, dude, you're having an unbelievable season. You're incredible. You're our future. You're everything that this team is going to be. But right now, Lando has the mathematical chances. If there is a scenario where you are line astern, Lando finishes ahead. It's that simple. That is how we play it. If you are in a race scenario and Lando is ahead of you, you play rear gunner. You do not attack. You make life difficult for the people behind, and you play the team game, and you help us bring both titles home, because it's a team sport and it's a team game. Your time will come, and it will likely come next year, and when you are in the position that Lando is in now, you will have our full support. Simple as that. We've got 8 races to go. Think long term, and let's bring it home.
That sounds eminently sensible. My only concern about those is when you've got the 2 drivers and their relative performance complicating it, you can risk tangling yourself in knots as a team, kind of managing that. But I do agree that what you've laid out... Because they haven't
already.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, that's a very good response.
They've created such a tangled web through their own, I mean, we'd say indecision, or ineptitude, or whatever you want to throw at it. But maybe it's all actually this has come from them trying desperately so hard to be fair, to provide parity, and all.
I think it comes from a good place.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think it's an aptitude in that regard. I think it's an honest desire for this to play out fairly, but then that's also a hope it'll sort itself out without intervention, which is a risk. And in this game, at this level, in this sport, where drivers are by their nature inherently selfish and think solely about themselves, you cannot put the decision in their hands. It has to be taken away. It has to fall down to team management to say,
You are employees. You drive for us. This is what's important for us. You will do what's best for the team and our decision.
Ben, you've now got the McLaren team principal hat from Will. So what are you saying? What's your policy for the final 8 races?
Well, I still think you just decide. You pick a race, like Ferrari used to, and you say at this point, whoever's ahead, we're going to prioritise in the drivers. Maybe that ship's already sailed because it should have been earlier. Maybe it should have been Monza, because I still feel like the only 2 races we're talking about where swapping the drivers could have made a material difference is Hungary before the summer break and Monza. Otherwise, yes, the Austria sprint, but that's before really there was ever even a hope of McLaren winning constructors, never mind Norris winning the drivers. So it's quite a recent decision to have to take. If you can't just... One
thing we can say is Piastri's not winning the championship from 106 points back.
Well, you don't know, do you? He's still
that.
In mathematical contention, isn't he? How many did you say there were? 200 and something points available? He could.
Yeah, Sergio Perez is probably still in mathematical contention.
I don't know. That's a stretch.
But Verstappen is going to keep scoring points, isn't he? I mean, okay.
Bottas is definitely out now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think if you said Valtteri Bottas, you'll be world champion if you scored 1 point. He'd be hard-pressed in that crate of a Sauber.
But no, so you want a cut-off point. My cut-off point was Austria. Because Austria was round 11. 10 rounds done after Spain, right? Lando's finally up to P2. He's got double the points of his teammate. At that point, he's 69 points off Max Verstappen with 13 races left to go for the season. That is eminently doable once you've had, since Miami, Imola almost win. Monaco, Oscar looked really good there. Car looked really, really quick. They know they've got a fast car. Canada, through that win array, through indecision on the pit wall. Spain, arguably, did they make the most out of that race? Possibly, but still a very, very competitive car. They know they're in the hunt. They know they've got to maximize every single opportunity. 69 points is the gap with over half the season remaining. You focus on it then. Hungary never happens. You have clear decision making at Silverstone, because you're only really prioritizing your main driver there. Perhaps they pull out more points than they did and they don't make the mistake there.
But they did prioritise Norris there, didn't they? He got the stop. And then what they messed up was the strategy call later, where they put him on the wrong tyre for the restart. So there's always this element of McLaren just messing up the chances they've already had. And so the cut-off point, okay, so Perez is still in mathematical contention. I worked it out. He's still comfortably in mathematical contention to win the World Championship.
Is Franco Colapinto?
No. Once you get to Alonso, who's in 9th, it's a lost cause. So any one of the top 8 mathematically could still win the championship. And that kind of makes my hope to default to 1990s. I'll just wait till the points say it's not possible. It's ludicrous now because the points are so massive.
You can't do it, can you?
That you can't do it.
So where's your cut-off?
The cut-off for me has probably already been and gone.
Well, after the summer break.
They probably could have, but I mean, I just still don't think Lando has a realistic chance of winning it. So if I'm McLaren, I probably have to deal with that uncomfortable truth. I can't be myself now. I have to be Andrea Stella, don't I? So I just look at it and I go, I mean, is it worth it? Is it worth having that conversation with Piastri and Mark Webber? That's what you're talking about, isn't it? Because they're going to look back over the season, as we've elaborated a lot, and look at there are lots of squandered chances for Norris, but also squandered chances for Oscar. And they're going to be like,
Piastri and Webber will want to take everything they can get, so they'll only seed stuff if you make them. Yeah, if you tell them. So
there's going to have to be some kind of sweetener in the deal, isn't there, to get him to seed Grand Prix,
which is what Will talked about, which is next year.
Yeah,
but it has to come at some point, because you can't. They've already laid this out for the world to hear in Guilt Trip in Lando in Hungary.
Yeah.
Give up the position now, because you're going to need Oscar later in the year if you want to win this championship.
Well, maybe was it this year, or was it just in the future?
Or just in general.
Yeah, because I don't think they knew, did they? I don't think they knew at that stage that he had a shot. They knew he was ahead.
You're going to cash in your chips already.
So I don't know.
But that's again, take your chance when you have it.
I think just prioritise the constructors and then make Norris win the drivers himself. It's the easiest thing for them to do.
I don't think there's much of an either or in the drivers and constructors. As Stella keeps saying, if you get the results and keep getting the wins and maximising what you've got, then they kind of both come. I think the difficult thing,
but they need Red Bull to still underperform. That's the key thing. It's not in their own hands, is it? It's not in their own hands.
Red Bull are not going to get ahead of them. Again, I'd be very surprised if that happens this season. Certainly not over the next couple of races. But the one interesting thing is, I've cited a few times historically how far behind Norris is and how unlikely it is historically to do it. So just to put some numbers on that, if you look at biggest points margins overcome and you adjust those points pro rata to match the current system, Norris at his most distant was 84 points behind. And the only person who's made up a bigger margin than that is James Hunt in 76. And that was when Lauda crashed. A couple of races, came back very early and struggling. So that was an exceptional set of circumstances, which we do not want to see repeated. Now, Norris was 84 points behind. He's now, 62, isn't he?
Yeah.
That would still be the third biggest comeback. You've then got Kimi Räikkönen in 2007, not just that late comeback, but he was 26 points behind at one stage, which is 65, give or take, in today's money. And then that slots Norris, if he catches from here, in ahead of John Surtees, who was about a 55-point gap he made up in 64.
Huge unreliability then, isn't there?
That for me is the big thing that's always there. It's like Norris has never really got close enough. Even if you give him the 10 points from those two Grand Prix and another one from the sprint, 11 points, he's still making glacial progress, isn't he?
Yeah.
That's my biggest... And I think if you're Norris...
He's not doing enough.
But he's doing what he needs to do.
It's not doing enough.
It's not a fast enough... It's not a fast enough rate, though, is it?
But he is. If it's 8 points
not,
a
though,
weekend, he's doing enough.
Well, he can do enough, but he's not
been
doing that. I think that for me is the big challenge. But the trouble is...
He has done. When we came back after Spa, it was 78 points. So you needed 8 points a weekend in order to take the title from Max. He did that down to 70 after Zandvoort, down to 62 after Italy. He is precisely on point of what he needs to do every weekend. It could have been more in Monza, and arguably should have been, because that would have helped him. But he needs 8 points a weekend, and that's what he's done.
It's still all relative to what the others are doing. Like the Raikkonen example is really interesting because Ferrari had that, as I mentioned, cut off, right? Monza, Felipe, you back Kimi, and then the following year it happened the other way round. But of course, in 2007, the team they were fighting, McLaren, had two drivers in the mix as well. So it was 4 from 2 teams. But in this case, we're talking about 2 at McLaren and unquestionably 1 at Red Bull. So it's not the same fight.
Which is why you need to
Max
focus.
Is not going to lose points to his teammate. They might lose to Ferrari and Mercedes, but actually that could be true of both teams.
So you need to focus. You need to pick one. If your main rival has picked one and thrown everything behind that one, you cannot waste your opportunity farting around on parity between your two drivers. You pick one. For good or ill, you pick one and you stick to it and you give them your full backing. Otherwise, you're not going to win it, and you're going to deserve not to win it. And I've said that before.
Not if you want to keep Piastri happy, though.
I would suggest there's a great opportunity for McLaren now to say, right, we've got Baku and Singapore. Red Bull, we don't expect them to be super strong in those two, so we're going to go all in on you, Lando, in these 2 races.
Yeah.
Make up the points, and then if,
lay down the marker.
The closing rate is good enough, then we carry on. And that will also answer one imponderable question, because I think the key way to reconcile kind of Will's position, which is back Norris, and mine, which is he hasn't quite made himself fully backable, is the thing you alluded to earlier. Well, what effect does it have on Lando if you say, right, Lando, now we are 100% backing you, you're our guy, Oscar is helping you. Does that mean that Norris isn't high stress at the starts or whatever? Does that help him be the best of himself? I don't know 100%, but it could have that effect, and that's what I'd want to answer.
Does it lift him? Yeah. Does it give him that edge that he needs to actually be at that competitive level that you want to see from him? That's a great question. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, lay down the challenge. I like that.
Yeah, I love that.
Because if he hacks 25% points out of Verstappen in Baku and Singapore, then that does change the competitive picture, and it for the first time really puts Norris properly in the championship fight, because he's still a very long way behind. So I wonder if that's it.
But you have to say to Oscar, you can't just come home 11th. okay, for both races. You've got to try. You have to actually try.
Well, I think what you say to Oscar Piastri is not only does it all get reset next year and you've got a chance to assert yourself, but also maybe you can find a way to incentivise Lando Norris winning the championship as well.
That's what I was alluding to.
Perhaps a little win bonus.
Yeah,
bonus, exactly. Just to sort of, make the pill a bit easier to swallow.
The only thing they'll have to do is make it very publicly clear they're doing it, because that's what
100%.
If I was Piastri or Webber, I'd say, look, this has got to be talked about, and I will say I will play the honourable, good team player publicly, and you will make
and
clear
there's no
that's
shame in it. There's no shame, and that you get a lot of people going, "This is it's Formula One, it's racing." Yes, it is, but for the history of this sport, it has been about teamwork and about helping your teammates out.
And this is very old school as well, isn't it? It's like, you're the number 2 for now, but this will change. It's Fangio alongside Farina in 1950. It's an old story.
Or even Schumacher coming back to help Irvine in 99 after he broke his leg. He was unquestionably the better driver, but at that point he wasn't in contention. So there's definitely precedent for it. I like the idea of a little test bed run of races, short one, to see if you can make it work, because then also you get a better idea of how screwed Red Bull are, because if Max comes back in Baku and Singapore, where they have had a bad time recently, and actually is right there, he's finishing right behind Norris or manages to get ahead of him in one of the races, then actually it's more anomalous that Red Bull have struggled rather than a massive pattern of underperformance that he's going to be basically in the 4th quickest car from here on out, because you need to know that Norris winning the championship relies on basically, I think, Monza levels of performance mapping across pretty much through the rest of the season, realistically, because of how good Ferrari and Merc can be on a given day. Whereas if Max recovers and is right there with the McLarens, as he has been most of the season since they've been in the fight, then it's a moot point, and it doesn't really matter what you do. Norris isn't going to win the championship.
And the other thing is, it's also worth noting that it's good to put as much pressure on Red Bull now as you can, because the more pressure you put on them to hang on to the championship, the more they might shift a little bit of resource off 25, the more effect that might have on 25 and 26. So it comes down to this. In F1, you've always got to make the most of it. But I think McLaren are learning, and I think they've done an enormous amount very, very well this year, and they deserve a huge amount of credit. This is they've almost prematurely ended up in this championship situation. They should win the constructors. There's a slender chance still of getting the drivers, and maybe the next 2 races are the way to go. So I think we've solved the problem for them.
And let's be really clear about this as well. They've not won the constructors in a quarter of a century. 25 years since they last won the constructors. That tells you how out of practice they are in all of this. And yes, it's a very different team, but an astonishing job from them. And also just rewind 18 months. Back of the field, the slowest car, no prospects, to potentially taking both championships in 2024. It's an unbelievable thing they've done.
Yeah, and it's only going to get better from here, I would imagine. So, let's see what happens in the next 2 races. It's been a great debate. I think we've learned something. I think all our positions have shifted a little bit, which is always a good sign, and hopefully listeners have got some new perspectives too. So thanks very much, Will. And everybody look forward to Grand Prix, An Illustrated History of Formula One, coming out in October. We will speak to Will at length about the book very soon. Brad Pitt likes it. It's his favourite F1 book. So if that's not the recommendation you need, then I don't know what is. So
no more Google for me either.
Exactly, yeah, definitely no more Google. So, thanks very much for your time. Thanks, Will, for taking some time out, and stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
The wait is finally over. The new NFL season starts this week. I'm Diana Rossini, senior NFL insider at The Athletic, and my new podcast, Scoop City, is ready to be your go-to football companion this season. Twice a week, myself and Chase Daniel, who played quarterback for 7 different franchises in 14 years, will take you inside the inner workings of the NFL. You'll hear fresh intel, deep analysis, and fascinating interviews with big-ticket guests. So far, we've sat down with Andy Reid, Josh Allen, Sean Payton, and a host of others, with loads more to come. So check out Scoop City this NFL season. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.